Hi, in this video I'm going to look at rounding whole numbers. So we're not going to look at decimals just yet, we're going to just have whole numbers that we're going to round to the nearest 10, 100, 1000 and so on. But really once you understand the process and you can round to the nearest 10 or 100, then you can apply that to your larger numbers as well. Okay, so when we round a number, we're making it less accurate, but that can be a really useful thing to do. Sometimes we don't need every single digit of accuracy in a really long accurate number, and it can make it a wee bit more awkward to work with if we do keep all of those digits and all of that information. On the screen you can see the columns and the labels of all our different place values. So we've got our units, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and we could go on. So just to clarify something quickly, if we have a number like 327, we've got 3 in the hundreds column, 2 in the tens and 7 in the units. So there are 3 hundreds, there's a 20 and there's a 7, together written as 327. If we want to round a number, we have to decide what it's closer to. And where we're rounding is important. We're trying to work out which 10 is it closest to, which 100 or which 1000. So I'm going to start with tens and then work my way up and do a couple of examples of each. So let's start with a number with just tens and units, like 27. So if I wanted to make that number less accurate, but a bit easier to work with, if I didn't need as much information as that 27, I could round it to the nearest 10. So let's think about money just to give this a bit of context. At first, say I have 27 pence. So that could be 2 10pences. So I've got 2 in my tens column, and 7 units. I've got 7 pennies. Okay, and what I'm trying to decide is that closer to 20 pence or is it closer to 30 pence? And the answer you might be able to spot from the diagrams is that it's closer to 30 pence. Because we already have 7 pennies, and I'd actually just need to add another 3 pennies for that to make an extra 10 pence. Now if we want to do it just by looking at the numbers, we identify which column we're rounding to first of all. So we're rounding to the nearest 10. So this is the one we're really thinking about. Is it going to be closer to 2 tens or is it going to be closer to 3 tens? This one was closer to 3 tens because there was a 7 in the units column, and I only needed an extra 3 pennies for that to be turned into a whole other 10 pence. So there is a cut-off point, and that cut-off point is the number 5. If we had 5 pennies or above, we'd be closer to having 30 pence. So we need to look at this next column to decide, are we closer to 20 or are we closer to 30? If the number after the place that we're rounding to is 5 or above, then we have enough to make the next 10 pence. So that's why 27 will become 30 when it's rounded to the nearest 10. Okay, they're obviously different numbers. 27 is not the same as 30. And be careful when you're writing that out that you don't write equals as well. They're not equal to each other, they're not exactly the same. But 27 becomes 30 when it's been rounded to the nearest 10. Okay, let's do a couple more. Let's go for 571. So I still want to round to the nearest 10 here. Let's stick to rounding to the nearest 10, but I've added an extra stage in this one by putting a 5 in the hundreds column, so you might be wondering how that affects, or if it affects, what we're doing with our rounding. And it doesn't, because if you think back to that last example, if there were £5 there as well, that's not going to affect my judgment on whether I had closer to 20 or 30 pence. So if we think to the money concept here, 500 pence would be £5. That's banked, we've got that, that's definitely fine and safe. What we need to decide is whether the 71 is closer to 70 pence or closer to 80 pence. So same idea as before. What number am I concerned about? So if I'm going to round to the nearest 10. Then we look at the tens column. And is it going to be 570 or is it going to be 580? The number after tells me what to do. So I realise if that's 5 or less, we round down. Okay, I still have my 570, but we've just worked out that we've got closer to 570 than 580. So our options are always that number that I've circled stays the same or might go up by 1, but only if the number after it is 5 or above. So for this one, 571 becomes 570 to the nearest 10. We have to be quite careful when we have the number 9, and I'll show you why. Okay, if we look at this number here and we want to round to the nearest 10, we have 396. So round to the nearest 10, that's our place that we're rounding to, the one we're thinking about. So is it either going to stay as a 9, which would be 390. And as I said, your two options are stays the same or goes up by 1. But the maximum value we can have in a single column is a 9. So how can 390, what would the other option be? We've got 390 or a 10 bigger than that. And the 10 bigger than that does knock you up to having another full 100. So if it's a 9 and you round up, then you will see an effect in one of the columns further up. 396, 6 is 5 or above, so it's going to round up. So just think 390, or we can even think of those two digits, that 39. What would be the next possible number that we could have going up by 1? So it would be 390 if we rounded down, but we were not because it was 5 or above, it's 396. So we're very close to having that next 10. What's the amount that you could make with 10 pence pieces? It needs to end with a 0 in that units column. 396 would have to go up to 400. Sometimes people say to me, but that's a 100, not a 10. Right? It is still a nearest 10, it is a 10 and a 100. If you count up in tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. You do get 100, it's 10 tens. Here we have 40 tens. So we do still come across values like that sometimes. Go to use that same number again, 396. No, I'm not, sorry. Let me pick a different one. Let's go for 571. Okay, so this number, if I wanted to round it, let's round to the nearest 100 now. So if I want to round to the nearest 100, I'm going to circle the hundreds column. It's a 5 just now, and what our judgment's asking is, will it stay as a 5 or become a 6? Is it closer to 500 or is it closer to 600? And we actually only need to look at the one number after it to decide that. The fact that it's 70 something, we actually don't even care about the something. If you had £5 and then 70 something pence, and I want to know, is that closer to £5 or have you got closer to the next pound up to having £6? It wouldn't actually matter if you had 71 pence, 72 pence, 73 pence. Those pennies are quite small in comparison. It's the 70 that's important. As soon as we say 570, the 70 tells you that we're closer to 600. Because 7 is 5 or above. So 571 rounded to the nearest 100 is 600. Okay, and if I just reiterate that point with one other example, if you had 729 and we want this one to the nearest 100. So I can look to the hundreds column. I want the nearest 100. It's a 7 just now. Options are stays a 7 or becomes an 8. Is that closer to 700 or 800? It's 720 something. It doesn't even matter that that's a 9. As soon as we hear it's only in the 20s, then we know it's the bottom end of that 100. It's closer to 700 than it is to 800. We follow our rule. Number after the one we're rounding to tells us what to do. It's less than 5, which means we're staying the same. So 729 to the nearest 100 becomes 700. Okay, as I said, once you understand this rule, we can apply it when we're rounding to the nearest 10, 100, 1000, tens of thousands. It's the same process. And it's only ever going to be that one digit next to it that tells you what to do, because comparatively the ones next to that are so small they're not making a difference. So let's go for this one here, to the nearest, sorry, messy handwriting inside here, to the nearest 1000. So I'll find my thousands column. That's my thousands there. 59,000. So you could think we've got 59 thousands, we do, but we can break that into saying we have 5 tens of thousands and 9 single thousands. Then there's 162. So I've got 9 in my thousands column. Options are stays the same or goes up by 1. How does 9 go up by 1? Well, really we'd need to think of that 59 going up by 1. Instead of 59,000, we could have 60,000. So, are we going to stay as 59,000 or are we going to 60,000? Number after tells us what to do. It's less than 5, telling us we stay at 59,000. Again, the 6 and the 2 are unimportant. 59,100 and something. It doesn't matter the something because we've only got 100. We need 10 hundreds for another 1,000, so we're so far away from being close to 60,000. Adding another 62, if you think in terms of money, adding £62 is not going to make a difference to whether we're closer to 59 or 60,000, because the size of those numbers as you go down the line here are making less and less of an impact. We'll only ever need to look at the one after the one we're rounding to. So 59,100 and anything becomes, 59,100, and it doesn't matter what they were, but this one was 62, rounds to 59,000. Okay, so to sum up, we are rounding by, if you want to follow my layout here, I'm circling the one that is in the position that we're reckoned to round to, so it's either in the tens, hundreds, thousands, whatever the question specified. So this question said round to the nearest thousands, that's why I've circled that one. The number after it tells you whether that circled number is going to stay the same or whether it's going to increase by 1. If the number after, the one that I've underlined, is 5 or less, then the place we're rounding to, that digit will stay the same. If it's 5 or above, the place we're rounding to will increase by 1. For some examples, that will have a knock-on effect, like the one on the board just now. 59,000, if we did have a number larger than 1 in this hundreds column here, then that would have a knock-on effect. 59,000 would need to go up to 60,000. But because it was a 1, for this example, it stayed as 59,000. Okay. That's the end of my video. Hopefully it was helpful.